make the methodology section interesting. Okay, so we engaged in qualitative research, and we intentionally did so because we wanted to privilege the voices of youth. And in particular, we use focus groups as a research method, and we tried to gather youth who had particular characteristics, such as shared religious group membership, gender, etc., on purpose, so that the youth would feel comfortable, they would feel free to express themselves. We also conducted research observations within the research context, and these were both of the research processes as well as the setting. Yes, the researchers, this research team was brought together because all of us have similar interests and perspectives in relation to identities, and particularly in relation to gender, religion, and nation. And all of us have worked in our country contexts in the past. So as Mairead pointed out, we conducted a joint research project that was funded by Oxfam, Novib, and SIDA, Swedish SIDA. And I'm Canadian, that's why I say Swedish SIDA, not Canadian SIDA. And also it was on youth as active citizens for their rights to education and sexual and reproductive health. And also Noreen conducted her PhD research in Pakistan, and I conducted mine in Lebanon, and both of us have done other research projects in these country contexts as well. And Mairead and Barbara also have conducted research within their country context. So each of us was responsible for one country context. As I think somebody mentioned previously, Mairead was responsible for Nigeria, Barbara was responsible for Senegal, Noreen was responsible for Pakistan, and I was responsible for Lebanon. And so the research process was very collaborative. So pre-field work, what we did is we got together and we clarified our research aims and structure. We developed sort of our research instruments and developed, ethical and research protocols together. Post-field work, we conducted held a number of meetings where we discussed our findings and did an analysis, a refinement of analysis, and explored commonalities and differences between the case studies. But we also had individual responsibilities, and this included data gathering and preliminary analysis for each country case study, as well as the write-up of the country case studies. So this is the data set. So as Noreen mentioned, in Pakistan there were 13 focus groups that were held. 12 were held in Peshawar in the university, and one was held in Karachi with Ismaili women who were attached to a university. And there was also a small focus group with Christian Catholic youth, underprivileged youth in Pakistan. Then in Senegal, the majority of interviews were conducted in Dakar and its vicinity. And sorry, it's very dark in here. I'm having trouble reading my own notes. Okay, most of the youth in Senegal were sourced through participants from previous research work that Barbara had done, particularly the YAP study. And in Nigeria, most of the research took place in Adamawa State, and some in Plateau State as well. In Lebanon, the research took place in the South Lebanese city known to people in Britain as Tyre, but in Arabic it's known as Sur, and all of the participants in Lebanon were Shia, and We chose Shia specifically by design because we wanted to look at internal fractures within Islam as well as relations between Muslims and others. And you'll notice that in the case of Senegal, the age range is quite large, and this was because the youth self-identified as youth. You might be wondering why somebody who's 35 would be considered a youth, because they self-identified as such. And in many cultures, as you know, youth is not associated with age necessarily, but can also be associated with marital stages, economic independence, and so forth. And in Lebanon, there was also a focus group with Christians, and they were Protestants in an evangelical school. Okay, so at the beginning of each research, in each country context, what we did is we asked participants to fill out a bio data sheet, and this enabled us to gather socio-demographic characteristics of participants, such as, where they live, their age, information about their families and so forth. And this was translated into local languages and Arabic, Urdu, and Hausa, and French. Then we conducted focus groups. The focus groups were selected based on certain criteria, as I mentioned earlier, particularly gender and religion. And each focus group had 4 to 6 participants. We conducted the focus groups in conjunction with youth researchers or local researchers in each country context. And these researchers, I cannot stress enough how valuable and indispensable they were in making contacts and helping us to arrange interviews and acting as gatekeepers and so forth. And my co-researcher in Lebanon happens to be sitting over there, and he was extremely helpful. Without him, the study could not have taken place. So in all country contexts, with the exception of Senegal, youth were identified and sourced through educational institutions, both K-12 institutions as well as higher education institutions. In the case of Senegal, as I mentioned, participants were sourced through previous research that had been conducted in the country. Senegal also, and in some of the other country contexts, although not Lebanon, out-of-school youth were interviewed, and this was because in many country contexts, educated youth tend to be of a higher socioeconomic status. So we wanted to look at how youth from poorer backgrounds identified in terms of these criteria. So we had a generic interview schedule, which we used, and the interview schedule asked questions such as, how do you understand, your nation? Who is a good Lebanese, or who is a good Nigerian, or so forth. And then we looked at intersectionalities. So for example, if the answer were all males, we would follow it up with other questions, and how does religion intersect with that? Okay, all of the interviews were recorded and transcribed in various languages and later translated into English. And in terms of analysis, okay, we used the bio sheet, first of all, to try to identify patterns in terms of, participants having certain characteristics related to gender or ethnicity, etc. Then we reread the data, compared it to the research questions, and reflected on theoretical work within the field. We tried to look at debates that were occurring in the focus groups, and the focus groups, of course, produce information about normative views on particular subjects, but they also highlight debates when you see people questioning and contesting what other people are saying. So that was also very helpful. Then what we did is we tried to organize all of the responses around the themes of nation, religion, and gender, and then to map out youth narratives of identity based on this. Then we came back to the UK, had several meetings together, and tried to look at the similarities and differences across country cases to develop an analysis. So this led us to differentiate key elements of identity such as nation, religion, and gender. So in terms of Muslim youth's national identities, it was quite interesting how despite the challenges that globalization has imparted on the nation state, and despite challenges to national identity through post-nationalism, cosmopolitanism, global citizenship, and so forth, youth in general assumed that the nation was a fact, and they saw the nation as important in terms of imparting rights to them, such as the right to education. So, as one of my colleagues has mentioned, all of the states post-colonial are parliamentary democracies, and the youth expressed strong commitment to democratic values, but they were very critical of politicians' failure to deliver. So, for example, they were very critical about the corruption that existed within their countries, or governments using religion to try to separate people, and so forth. So what the youth did, we identified that they looked at two key factors. One was external others and one was internal others. So in the case of Pakistan and Senegal, the national imaginaries of youth were relatively unified, although there were certainly contestations and contradictions there, but they primarily identified themselves in relation to an external other. So as Noreen mentioned, in the case of Pakistan, it was primarily India and Hindus, and in the case of Senegal, it was primarily France, other Africans, and les blancs, white. However, in Nigeria and Lebanon, there were considerable fractures in national imaginaries. So these were primarily around ethnicity, region, and religion. And particularly in the case of Nigeria, ethnicity played a key part, and region, the north and the south, in terms of how the youth identified themselves. And in Lebanon, certainly the Shia considered themselves to be a sub-nation within the nation. So also, what was very powerful were the historical traces of colonialism and imperialism within the youth narratives. So, for example, within Nigeria, 3 different regions had been combined to create the state of Nigeria, and these internal fractures are very much present in youth's construction of national identities today. In Senegal, the youth had a very interesting relationship with Frenchness, and Frenchness, on the one hand, gave individuals higher status over others, but on the other hand, within post-colonial national identification, it gave them distinctiveness. In Lebanon, the sedimentation of religious differences in relation to the confessional constitution also reverberated very strongly with the youth, and it has historically sustained the subordination of the Shia. So, yeah, the intersectionalities were extremely interesting and important. So I'll pass this over to Barbara.